Welcome to the Greg Bennett Show, presented by AnyQuestion. I'm your host, Greg Bennett, and I've just recorded a wonderful conversation with one of the world's great coaches in the world of triathlon and endurance sports, and even more specifically these days in the world of strength and conditioning, Tim Crowley. And we go through his journey into becoming a coach. He was a professional triathlete for a period of time. He still races and trains as an elite age grouper right now in his late 50s. We talk about the book he's writing, which is all about high performance aging. And then we spend a fair bit of the show actually discussing different exercises that you can do for rehab in the world of swimming, cycling, and running, and exercises to help you actually have better performances. A lot of fun in this conversation. He gives us a lot of information. I think you'll truly enjoy it. We finished the show with some opinions and some rapid fire questions, which is also a lot of fun. You can find Tim also on AnyQuestion, where he's answered over 100 questions already. The amount of content that he's producing on AnyQuestion is just absolutely wonderful. And you can go to anyquestion.com/Coach Tim. So that's anyquestion.com/Coach Tim. You can find him there. You can go and sign up AnyQuestion on iOS or Android and listen to his answers and ask him any questions you like. There's also 300 to 500 other experts on the platform that you can reach out to. Anyway, I hope you enjoy this one as much as I did. And remember, success comes to those who endure just one moment longer. All right, today I am joined by one of the world's greatest triathlon and strength coaches. He's been coaching triathletes since 1993 and has been a pro and elite age grouper for over 30 years. He's the head strength and conditioning coach at Montverde Academy in Central Florida and is the owner of TC2 Coaching. He was a 2008 Team USA Olympic Triathlon Coach, and he has coached athletes to World Championships, Ironman Championships, ITU World Triathlon Series Gold, Duathlon World Champions, numerous national championships at the elite level. And he was the 2009 USA Triathlon Elite Coach of the Year and 2007 USA Triathlon Development Coach of the Year. He's worked with the very best in the business and helped each of them just optimize themselves. And his answers on the AnyQuestion platform have been truly outstanding. And his depth of knowledge is just absolutely remarkable. It's just an honor and privilege to have him join me today. So welcome, and thank you for joining me on the Greg Bennett Show. Tim Crowley, how are you, mate?
I am great. Thanks for having me. And actually, before this gets lost in our conversation, I want to congratulate you and Laura. I saw she was just inducted into the USAT Hall of Fame.
Oh, yeah. That was, thank you so much, Tim, and for mentioning that at the top of the show here. It was, Laura, unlike me, isn't that fond of getting pats on the back. Like, she really is a very intrinsic person. Her motivation always comes from within. And but this one, when USA Triathlon reached out to her and have inducted her, and we got the award that night, I think in about a week or two, we're heading up to Milwaukee. Mm-hmm. It really did make her feel very, very special. You know, it was one of those where I saw her light up and was like, wow. You know, it was just that recognition. Thanks for pointing that out, mate.
No worries.
I really appreciate it.
It's well deserved for, the body of work that she had done over the years. And I think once you're removed from the sport for a few years, it probably is a little bit more meaningful at that point.
I think it is. I think it's nice to get it after you've been retired for 5 to 10 years. It's kind of like, oh, somebody does care.
Yeah, exactly. You're not forgotten.
I also want to throw the congrats back at you too, mate. You've been, when you go through that introduction resume that and I only glanced over a few of the items that you've been involved in. I mean, you've been busy. How does it feel when you hear that sort of read back to you? How's
that make you tired? It's
yes.
like you're listening you listen to someone else, because I think what happens is I don't rarely take time to look back. Or to relive stuff. It's just like, okay, what's the next thing? It's almost like, when you listen to Tom Brady and say, like, which is your favorite Super Bowl? It's like the next one. Yeah. You're always looking for the next one. And then, I say eventually someday I'll sit down and look back. And sometimes when I have to write these things out for like resumes or some other stuff, I occasionally will glance at it and go, wow, I forgot about that one or forgot about that. But it's just, as a coach, I think what you are is you're a problem solver, and you're just trying to do the best for your athletes. And I've said it's like, I don't really worry about whether people know who I am, but it's super important to me that people recognize and know the athletes that I work for. And that's it. It's just, and that's just because you're behind the scenes. It's like, to be a good coach, I think you want to be kind of behind the scenes as kind of the mad scientist doing all this stuff, because at the end of the day, if you're doing a good job, people will find you.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I agree. And you mentioned something there, and it seems to be a common thread amongst the guests I have on this show, that there's this drive, this futuristic kind of determination to live out dreams and make the most out of life, to really see what they can do and be. And every now and then, I think the moment of just sitting back and reflecting is like, oh, okay, take a breath. Yeah. It's going pretty well. I've learned a lot, and but everybody seems, it's that kind of character that I have on the show. So I think it's great that you've just pointed that out. Where in the world are you right now? Where are you calling in from?
I am in Clermont.
Oh, you're just up the road. We could have done this in person.
I've been here for just 10 years now. Whole family, we've been up for, I grew up in Massachusetts, spent a lot of time up there. And then it was actually through, the athletes that I was coaching. I mean, you live through New England winters, and then you come down in the winter months, you have a whole bunch of athletes either living here or based out of Clermont. And, you spend a couple of days to a week every month down here during the winter, and you fly back and you go, why do I live here?
Why am I going back up?
So, we loved the first time I came here. I just fell in love. Me and my wife and kids, we fell in love with it. And a small town feel, although it's growing rapidly now. And, but I still love it. I mean, it's one of the few places in the world where triathlon is mainstream. And everyone understands it, and it's just a really good endurance community. And there's a lot of Olympic sprinters. Adidas has a camp here, Nike has a camp here, so there's just a lot of athletes around. But they're all very, very nice and welcoming, and so it's a good place. It
is fantastic. And we moved to South Florida end of last year permanently. We'd always come down here because Laura's family were down here, and I've loved it. It's always been a great place to be, especially in those winter months. Yes. Right now, as we're recording this at end of July, it can be brutal outside. Although I did just get back from Boston yesterday for an AnyQuestion team day, and it was a 35-degree day Celsius, and what's that, 97 or whatever Fahrenheit. It was hot and humid running along the Charles in the morning, the Charles River up there. And coming back here, it's not dissimilar, to be honest. I was kind of like, it's not that.
No, they get bad weather. They get bad, hot weather, humid weather in the summer. A lot of places, a lot of homes don't even have central air. Yeah. And they get the bad weather in the winter. So I harass my brother and my friends up there. It's just it's a nice thing to do.
Yes, but to everybody listening up in Massachusetts and that part of the world, please understand, it is some of the most beautiful parts of the world. Like, one of my favorite things is really to go for a run along the Charles River, and all the rowers are out, all the crews are rowing, and you're going past all the famous boat clubs from Harvard, and it is it's a special place. So as much as we're knocking it is beautiful.
Yeah, and then when you move a little bit, I live in the suburbs, like out west, out about 25 miles west, and it's really, I tell people at Clermont, it's a lot like central Massachusetts, where it's apple country, rolling hills, except with palm trees and way better weather.
There you go. Now you're in the process of writing a book, right? I mean, you've
Correct.
started. How far along is it? And it's on a topic that I'm very interested in, by the way, high performance aging, which we'll touch on more.
So it is high performance aging, and it's really kind of came about. There was no really idea to do this other than a couple years ago. I was like 54. I was like, how do I still want to be competitive? How do I do this? So I started doing a lot of research and came up with some different things I thought that were important that people generally aren't doing. And then I kind of was doing it myself. And then this past year, I did a talk at USA Triathlon's Endurance Exchange on high performance aging. It's one of those things when you're out for a long bike ride, you get this really cool name that pops into your head. And I'm like, I like that.
I like that.
So I pitched it, and it went very well. But the problem, it was like a 45-minute talk. But then I realized I could only gloss over some of the stuff, and I got a lot of really good feedback from it. So I said, hey, let me just take this outline, let me expand upon it, and then really dig into this. And what I use is it's a really cool platform. It's called CoachTube. Mm-hmm. It's a mix of written and video. And I think as a coach, it took me a lot of years before I started doing any writing, because it's hard you can't show stuff. If it's just writing, you can't, let's just say it's strength training or anything. It's really hard to show it in a picture, and you're not going to have it in a company DVD, because I don't even think they make those anymore. So I couldn't find the right format. So you could have a chapter talking about stuff, and then you can create the videos. which is really funny because it reminds me a lot like AnyQuestion in the sense, because that's kind of what it is. You've got these little, 2 or 3 minute things where you can explain. Sometimes it's in the gym, I can do it. Sometimes it's, just talking or explaining using a marker board. So it really gives me a lot of freedom on that. And then the other thing I really like about the platform is that I can also make changes. So if like a couple months from now, I come across some new information, I can go in and edit that so people always have the updated stuff. And again, you look at the sport triathlon right now, I think the number is somewhere in the high 50s to 60% are, kind of the, in the master category.
We're all becoming more self-aware in the sense of, look, if I'm in my 50s or 60s or even 40s for that matter, and it's kind of like, I want to just hold on to what I have and even find a little bit more if I can.
Yes.
And what are the areas that I need to be leaning into? I think I asked you a question actually on the AnyQuestion platform, which basically, look, how does somebody in their 50s, maintain their mobility? And,
right.
I feel myself getting tighter and, stiffer and everything else. And you answered it very, very well.
Well, I can even go a little bit further. I mean, the biggest thing is, I think, and I may have said this on that answer as well, but, a little bit with people when they get older, they think like, oh, I'm tight, I need flexibility. It's really the way the joints move. And so if you start kind of at the ankle and move up, it's ankle is mobility, the knee is stability, and that really guides the way you train. The thing is, it doesn't have to be a lot. I mean, I think a lot of that stuff, I build a lot of that stuff into either kind of the warm up because it's more dynamic stuff that you can build into the warm up of a strength routine. It could easily be done before or after, like a run, as a 2-minute post, pre or post, run routine. So the trick is keeping it simple, because if it gets too involved and takes away too much stuff, then you're just not going to do it.
Well, the one you showed, my ankles are very, very locked. And it was both a gift and a curse for my triathlon career. I really felt the locked ankles for cycling were almost a great stabilizer to generate more power into the pedal. For running, it worked out quite well also for the shorter distances, but for getting to the marathons or anything longer, losing that one joint really wasn't ideal. But you gave a great example in AnyQuestion of sort of, you grabbed the pole in front of you and you hopped on one leg.
Oh, the ankle rock.
You bend the knee and then you kind of did these little dips, and it was like, that was one I'm like, okay, that's one I've got to incorporate right away.
I do that one before I run all the time. It's so funny. It's like if I have any original ideas, I'll let you know, but I kind of steal. The great thing about the field of coaching and strength and conditioning, you can pretty much steal from everybody and tweak it and call it your own. Although what I do is I really try to give credit where it's due and name workouts. Actually, I even have one in my Training Peaks named after you, because it's the, although no one does 20, but the 3 minutes in the big gear with the 1 minute spin. And I think you have 20 RPMs and then 20 reps of that, which is totally like an hour and a half workout. But that's become a staple. I do it a lot. I have my athletes do it a lot. So I always, when I rename them in there, I always give credit. So you're in my Training Peaks library.
I think I'm probably have to reference that from me, probably to even Brett Sutton, a lot of that big gear work that I did. But thank you for mentioning me. I appreciate it, but I even have to pass that one on, and he probably has to pass it on to somebody else, and that's that whole network effect. It's like, who knows where it really comes from. But the other one I loved so I do a lot of pull-ups and chin-ups and push-ups, like very much body weight work, and just I just enjoy them, to be honest. It's probably more vanity than it is anything else, and just and just trying to be able to lift the kids and that kind of things. And you have a really good answer in AnyQuestion as well, where I think somebody asked you, they've been getting to 10 pull-ups, but then they kind of go back to 8 pull-ups and they can't advance. And so this is a very selfish conversation I'm having right now with you, because it's an area that I kind of enjoy. And I loved your answer there. Maybe I'll let you expand on it a little bit more, but the different ways that we can kind of, if you find yourself in one place and not improving, and when it came to pull-ups, it was like, you can slowly lower yourself down, or you can do all sorts of different, do smaller reps, 5 or 6 at a time, and do multiples of 10 to 20 of those or whatever, sets of those. I appreciated that kind of answer, and that's kind of what I included into my own training. Oh, good.
Yeah, because those are simple. I mean, it depends if people have equipment, but like just doing an eccentric, slowly lowering yourself down, not just dropping down, will build strength. And then also doing the 3, basically doing an isometric hold at the top, the middle, and the bottom. And the brain is really good at kind of connecting the 3 points. Yeah. And then the third one was using, the resistance bands, and depending on the thickness of the band will dictate how much help you're going to get, certainly at the bottom of the rep. So you can use those just to progressive overload, because otherwise with pull-ups, it either becomes an all or nothing. You can or you can't.
Yeah. Yeah.
Then when you get really good at it, you can then start to add external load, whether it's holding a dumbbell or a med ball between your knees or putting a band around your waist anchored to the floor. So you got a lot of room for progress.
I put the chain around my neck, Tim.
There you go.
I got that one from The Rock. Put the chain around my neck, or that I did hurt my back a little bit, my upper thoracic. I think I was probably I went too far with that one.
Yeah.
And I'm being a bit silly because I'm not actually training for anything other than just health and movement and strength and in the basics, these days. And so I have a little bit of fun with it. The other one I kind of enjoy is to kind of get to the point of 30 seconds up, 30 seconds down. And I do that one at the end of most workouts, and that really hurts. Right. You're shaking by the end of it, but the amount of strength I feel from that is pretty cool. Let's do this. And I know you've listened, you told me before the show that you've actually listened to a few episodes, so you would have heard me sort of do this. And this is this time where I like to rewind the clock. And it gives me a chance to really get to know who you are and have the listeners understand who you are. And so I'd love to just get a little bit of a recap of your journey to date and understand, when did your passion come for, well, firstly, endurance sports in the world of triathlon, but then also the second part to that is, this world of strength and conditioning.
Yeah, it's like a lot of things. When I look back, I think like a lot of things kind of happened by accident. There was no grand plan, but I went to school. So I was a soccer player through high school and college, and I went to school for athletic training and sports medicine. But I kept seeing, even when I was in college, I kept looking at we have kids that are ending their career because they weren't doing certain things. But if the things we do in rehab that we kind of did them on the front end, and this is back in the kind of late 80s, so we were still using like Nautilus machines and stuff. So everything was really kind of a good time to get into that. So I wanted to be on the front end of that. And then once I graduated, finished college, I got into triathlon right away. I just I'm too young to be a retired athlete at 21. So I still wanted to be competitive. And that was, those were the days, those were the Wild West days where there was no internet. I mean, when I started racing, we'd had no clipless pedals, no bike computers. So
you and me both, mate. You and me both.
Yeah. You understand. I kind of wish I kind of loved those days because you just try to figure it out. You would, you'd read the magazines when they come out to get some semblance. So you just try to figure it out by trial and error. Yeah. And I really love that. And I continue to have that now. I love experimenting with stuff, trying to figure it out because, I always think one of my favorite questions is, what if the way we always did it was wrong? And I think that goes back to having confidence and stuff. And when you're, younger as a coach, everyone's doing things a certain way and you're thinking differently and you're going, this makes obvious sense. It should be done differently. But you're I must be wrong because everybody else is saying this. And at some point you realize if I'm going to get better, I'm going to make my athletes better, we can't just do it. If you do what everyone else is doing, you get the same results. So you start looking at it differently. And then, all of a sudden you start to see some success with that. And then you start to believe in yourself, and trust in that. And, I've always worked, even when I always say I was I got my pro license when I was 22. I might be the worst pro ever, but that was my lifelong goal, was to be a professional athlete. But it allowed me to race all over the world. It helped, and I think it's really helped me as a coach because you got to see everything firsthand, try stuff firsthand. And it's probably still why I still compete now, because you still have to have your hand in it. You still got to be kind of experimenting with stuff and trying to figure it out. And that's probably the part I love most.
I think there's something about that kind of self-experimentation where you learn so much. You would know Dr. Dan Plews, who's been on this show. And, one of the things that I've always admired with him is a bit like you. It's it's one thing to tell everybody what to do, but it's also nice to self-experiment and really get a sense of feel. And I'm not saying every coach has to do this by of course, but it is interesting that it is a way to do it, to go, does this work? And how does it feel on me? And what's it likely going to feel like on one of my athletes? It's very cool.
Yeah, you're exactly right. I mean, and what it is, I think we owe that, I think I owe it to my athletes. You can't make them the first guinea pig. So I'll try something out and you learn something, you try it out and you're like, oh my God, that worked. That did not work well. That was bad. Yeah. And then by doing it, you can now figure out, the progressions and the regressions, and then, this is going to be good for someone here. Otherwise, you're not just messing people up. And then from that one concept, you can probably come up with 10 different workouts and progressions. And I just find that I still love that, the most fun part of doing this.
That's very cool. And so when did you you were focused on being an athlete, even though you had your education behind you? When was that sort of change to becoming an athlete to a coach and focusing more on that?
It just happened naturally. I mean, I was working in the private sector and it was racing and competing and doing well. And I had a few people, that were, going to compete in Ironmans. And so, they hired me. So I started doing that for a bit. I was just doing that on the side a little bit. And then, I realized, okay, I want to take this to another level. And, that was a point where, I went and did my USAT coaching certification. And then, at that point, Scott Schitzbahn was actually running it, but Scott was actually the first triathlon coach at Carmichael Training Systems. So I talked to him. And so I worked with them it was like me and him were the first two triathlon coaches from like 2000 to, I want to say 2007. And that was a great experience because, that was when Lance Watson was there.
Yeah.
It was a great experience to learn from a lot of people. So that was fantastic. And then at that point, it kind of was a good time to launch off, kind of on my own because I had some ideas and doing some things differently. And that's kind of what I've been doing since.
Chris Carmichael, I remember having a dinner with him back in about 2002. And this is when Lance Armstrong was crushing it. And then I remember Lance Watson, who was sort of my consultant / coach during that time, he was then, he ended up working with him very early on, and they started branching out with this triathlon arm. And then I remember, that Scott and yourself joined in to that group. When did you realize, it's one thing to go into the coaching, but was there a moment where you thought, actually, I'm actually pretty good at it? Like there was, without patting yourself on the back too much.
That. I was actually thinking about that about an hour ago. And then I can remember it vividly. You're doing this coaching and, you've got some, some decent pro athletes that, good pro athletes that have hired you and you want to do them justice. So it was Ironman Arizona. I'm trying to think of what year it was. I want to say early 2000s, but it was when I was working with Heather Goldnick, and, she came in she'd won Ironman Wisconsin. And then I started, working with her, and she had some really big wins, but she came in a really, really close second place to McKeely Jones there. And I distinctly remember getting on the plane in Arizona and flying back and looking out the window and going, oh, all right, maybe I can do this. Because sometimes we can always think, I can do this, but can you? Can you do it? And that kind of was the start of it. And a lot of it just kind of happened, organically. It's like word of mouth, and people are talking to other people, and you get a phone call, and do you want to work? And just trying to find the right people, and just try to thinking, can you help this person? Can you take them? And for me, some of the most fun stuff is taking. I was fortunate to take a couple athletes from very, very never done a triathlon before, and either be becoming a good pro or being on the podium at US pro nationals and stuff like that. And I always said, when you get really high level athletes, the goal is they're already good. Just don't screw them up. Yeah. But can you develop them?
It's true. Some of it's just keep out of the way,
I say
right?
I say that with the basketball players I work with. It's like, I didn't make any of these guys, top NBA players, but I can guarantee you I screwed none of them up in the process.
That's right. They made it. So I did something right. I didn't get in their way, or maybe I helped. I don't know. But I mean, that's where I think a great coach gets to the point that they don't, you mentioned earlier in the show where it's like, you're not after the recognition. It is just about trying to help other people get to where they need to get to. And I think that's pretty huge for you and the other coaches that come on board and say, hey, it's not about me and I don't need the credit. I just don't want to screw you up. I like that. So what have been, as we talk about your career, is there any kind of moments that really stand out, some really great highs?
I'd have to say it was, I was at Charlotte Motor Speedway Duathlon World Championships when I think it was 2009. When Jared Shoemaker won in a sprint finish. And like an idiot, I was like at the last corner, which was maybe 300 meters from the finish. And it was like three guys in a sprint finish. And somehow I was at the corner. I told him, I'll be at the corner. I'll let you know how far, you're in front. If you're in front, how far the next guy is. So you don't have to look over your shoulder. I go, okay. So he comes in and he had like 2 steps. So he comes, I'm like, you got 10 feet. And then there's literally a 300 meter sprint finish. And for some unknown reason, I decided I was going to try to sprint to the finish and catch stuff. God knows I didn't make it in time. But I was just too excited. But like, I'm running down behind the barriers, pumping my fist and stuff like that. And, to be there when you have an athlete win a world championship and, they're spraying the champagne and stuff. Our athletes travel all over the place. So to be in that moment at that point in time and just enjoy that moment, that one's always stuck with me.
Oh, huge congrats to you and Jared. I'm a big fan of sometimes just reminiscing and going, that was a special moment. Yeah. Even when you get to retell it, and I can picture it. I love when people tell stories and you can picture the joy and the feelings that, it takes a lot of work to get to the point where you're a world champion. It's like, it's an incredible moment.
Everything has to happen. And as you know, there's just as many lows too. So you got to enjoy the good ones.
It's funny you mentioned that. I've said this on the podcast before where when a young, new professional triathlete will come to me and say, Greg, what can you tell me, And I'm like, well, I can tell you that basically you're going to lose far, 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 far more than you're ever going to win. But the joy of winning is so much better, the more you lose.
You almost have to you don't appreciate, you have to have both because, you can say like, well, the top three best, and actually maybe like, well, the top two best and well, the top five worst because they seem to be a little bit more because so much has to go into it for it to come off.
Yeah. And look, I've had guests on this show where they were so talented as juniors and youth and under 23s and they were winning everything. They'd actually never really lost. And finally they got to maybe the senior level and they weren't winning. And because they'd never had it, that ability to understand losing and what you can learn from it and how you can grow from it, they really struggled, mentally and then obviously physically because it was like trying to overreach. And there's such a process in becoming a great champion that the not accepting losing but learning from it is just so critical to really embracing the wins when they do come that you never take them for granted.
You were still racing when they came out with a WTS series, right? Back in, was it 2009?
Yeah, I did maybe one or two of them. For me, it was just a name change. And I was like, you know what?
That's trying to figure it out. I vividly remember all that because especially when you're American, like they had races in the summer, like every other week. That's where I learned about, how to study stuff like jet lag and everything else because do you set up a camp? Do you fly back and forth? It's now a series, not just the World Cups where it's, a bunch of one-off races. Now it's a series that matters. And that was a whole, it was a huge, fast learning curve.
Well, that's just part of it, isn't it? It's like suddenly, we would always, as Australians, we always had half the year in Australia and we do our Australian races and Asian races. And then we would go off to Europe and often circle back through the US, and finish off a few more. And you get 15 to 20 races around the world. And so for me personally, I was always based in Europe, whether it was Czech Republic, France, Germany, or Britain, or Spain, actually. So I've lived in all of those places for 3 to 6 months. And that was always, for an Australian, it was quite easy to do that. As Americans and US, there was never enough ITU type racing, the World Triathlon Series racing here. And so they basically had to be in Europe for the summer, which was the same as the North American summer. And then they had to be go to Australia or whatever. And so they were never home. Whereas Australians, we got to be one or the other, and Europeans get to be one or the other. And that was always a disadvantage, I felt, a little bit for the Americans. You'd have a couple of races in Canada, like Edmonton and, that. But for me, I always thought that was a little bit, people always want to beat up on, why aren't the American men haven't done better and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, well, there's plenty of reasons. And one is that the international racing is not here. And so for 12 months of the year, they got to be gone.
It's awful. I spent a lot of time going over there and doing that too. And, the nomadic lifestyle, I'm like, that's not for me.
No.
And a lot of the athletes, it's not either.
No.
They like to have a home base.
It gets tiring. And, for Laura and I, it was really I remember when we sat down, we said, look, we just need 2 home bases. And one of them would be Noosa, Australia. And Australia would be more about training than it was racing. We'd race right towards the end, and they'd be more pre-season races like Mooloolaba and anything else sort of there. And then we'd come over to the US and we'd race a race like St. Anthony's, or we'd live in Canada, or we'd go to Europe. But one of those North American bases, we'd have to do that and just create those 2 homes, and that's it. And for Laura, it was difficult because by 2007, I started moving away from the ITU racing, which was predominantly in Europe, and was focused now on the big racing in the US, which was non-drafting and a different style of racing. But Laura was still focused on the Olympics and the ITU series. And so for her, it became a lot of travel, and she really did sacrifice a lot of her career for me and our relationship, and something I don't take lightly. It was something very, very special that she was willing to sacrifice so much for her career to do that, because it is a lot of travel.
Oh, it's awful.
Yeah.
I mean, but even if you like travel, it's just, traveling with bikes and you're going here, there, and everywhere. It's like this is, you're traveling too much when you wake up in the middle of the night and can't figure out what country you're in.
Oh, well, I've been into so many hotels where I'm just walking down the corridor going, I have no idea I thought I was in 219, but that was last week. I mean, I'm on the wrong floor. Like, it's like I'm completely turned around. So, mate, that high is fantastic. Some of the bigger lows and the lessons that you learned from them, and how have they transformed who you are?
Yeah, the biggest, the one that really is the top one, and is, 2012, the final, U.S. Olympic qualifier. I mean, at that point, for the previous 4 years, working with Jared, he was like in the top 10. He had a lot of top 10, top 5 finishes. He won Hamburg. I mean, there was literally a 1 in 1,000 chance that he wouldn't qualify based upon the qualifications. And that happened. A lot of the Europeans didn't come over. There's a lot of situations that had to happen, and the weirdest situation happened. And it's like, the feeling of this. You've been, basically putting, 4 years, into that one thing. And like, we were thinking, hey, maybe you got a shot at a medal. With the qualifying, shouldn't have been an issue. And then all of a sudden you're not, you didn't go anywhere. And so that was tough in the sense of like, is that the end of my coaching career? And then you realize the rest of the world doesn't matter that much. Life goes on. And I think that was a really good lesson. And then the hindsight is the funny thing is, I look back at that was the low of the low. But if he had qualified in that event and went to London, and I went to London, we would have never moved to Clermont. And so that was kind of a life-changing stuff for us. And the funny thing is, Jared and Alicia live here, and actually, I still work with both of them in strength, with their strength training and stuff, now in their retirement. So it's strange how what, we think is a really low point is kind of disguised as something that maybe in the long run wasn't that bad after all. Although at the time it was really bad.
No. How many times does that happen in life? I don't want to make this show all about me either, but I have that same sort of story around the 2000 Olympics where, I was number 2 in the world. I'd won on the Sydney test event the year before. It was, of course, and I'd been podium there for the 4 years previous. And it was like, it wasn't so much even like, I'm pretty confident I'll make the Australian team, but how well can I actually do at the Olympic Games was the focus. And then to be left off that team, and that's a whole nother story. But
I remember it.
I moved to Canada and to help Simon Whitfield prepare. And in the process, I meet Laura, previously Laura Reback, now Laura Bennett, on that same camp. Yes. And boom, we were together. And, so I had my best mate go and win the Olympic gold. And I met the love of my life in that same, and it was like, wow. You know what I mean? It was like my life turned.
There's a lesson there.
Oh, it's huge. It really is like, I don't know. And I think that helps. And with age, you and I, we can reflect a little bit more on those things. And so when we are in tough moments in your life right now, it's like, this actually could be the thing that you needed to make the big change for the better, No,
I wholeheartly agree. I mean, I'm a big fan of, basically growth mindset and neutral thinking, and not getting wallowed down, what's next? What do I do next? What's the next step in this? And not, not get wallowed down in that. And basically being, a growth mindset is just really always trying to get better. And I saw this quote the other day. I was like, it's not about being the best. It's about being the best at getting better.
I like that.
And I think that resonates a lot with coaches. It's just a matter of how do we get better, because everything evolves so quickly. As soon as if you think you've got it figured out, you're already moving backwards.
Yeah. Oh, what a fantastic quote. I really like that. I'll steal it from you, but I'll refer to you. But
that's what I don't even remember where I saw it, but I just liked it. I'm like, I couldn't remember the person, but I remember the quote.
Yeah, no, but I love that growth mindset and getting yourself to neutral myself. They're things I talk about often on this show, but and have to keep reminding myself because it's a constant work in progress. I'm far from perfect by any means, but and look, tell me your coaching philosophies. Is there kind of a coach or somebody that really stood out to you that you felt like you learnt the most from, or has it been mainly books and courses? How have you sort of learnt your...
All the above. I mean, I've learned a lot. I mean, I think, obviously I think I've read in my library, I've got every, triathlon biking, running, swimming, strength training book ever. I try to make it a habit. I've been doing this for 30 years of reading a minimum of 30 to 60 minutes every day. So I get a lot of reading in. But what I also do is, I've been fortunate enough to a lot of these, authors, these books, actually reach out and become friends with a lot of them to be able to talk with them. When I was traveling the ITU circuit, people like Darren Smith, people who would just be willing to sit down and talk to me. I always find this great. I mean, my philosophy is like, if I'm going to be in a room of coaches, I pray to God I'm the dumbest one in there because I have the most to learn. And you just want to be able to learn. And again, I think you have to have a bunch of humility in there too. It's just like, you want to learn and ask people questions. And it's funny how really open people really are if you just ask.
Oh, absolutely. Isn't it amazing? I find that I couldn't agree more that people actually are quite happy to share. Yeah. And then even if you feel like you share everything, people always think you've got more to share anyway, so you might as well just keep sharing and it gets you out there. And the other day we had most of the strength coaches we have on the AnyQuestion platform, and we were all on one Zoom call and you were there. Yep. And it was special to just look around that Zoom call at a dozen or so of the greatest strength coaches in the world. And everybody went around the room introducing themselves. It was NBA, NHL, endurance sports or whatever. And everybody had a background that was phenomenal. And that, to me, was pretty cool just to be on that call and be surrounded by greatness. It was really special.
I wholeheartedly agree. And when I look at all those people, see, there's a certain case for imposter syndrome when you have all those people in a room and you're going, oh, crap. I think I probably pulled up my resume and read it after that.
I get it. Okay. We all do that, going, hang on, what am I doing here? What? No, not at all. Not at all. I think it's fantastic that you were there. And look, talking about strength training, because you've answered a lot of questions on AnyQuestion. And it really is, anybody listening to this should just go check out Tim Crowley's profile on AnyQuestion and just go through all of your answers. There's so much knowledge there. It really is. You're so generous and thoughtful with everything you share. And so I'd love to sort of just right now almost go through some of the topics and things that you've talked about already on AnyQuestion, but just sort of bring them onto the show a little bit.
That'd be great.
And one of the questions, and I'm not directly quoting the questions, but it was really just understanding, why is strength training important for endurance athletes? And is it all about injury reduction or injury, helping people come back from injury, or is it all about performance?
I'll give you three things. Yeah, I always say, this is kind of my patent when people ask me that question, like three things. One, you want to do the things because if you think of swimming, biking, and running, they're all cyclical. So they'll use some muscle groups, to the detriment of others. Let's take your typical swimmer's posture type thing, shoulders rounded forward. So the first thing is creating muscle balance and doing the things that you need to do to keep you out there and training. I always say from a performance standpoint, that's hugely important because if you can train consistently, you're probably going to get better. From a business standpoint as a coach, if you got people that are injured, what are they paying you for? To be hurt? So it works on both sides of there. The second thing is the performance side of it. It doesn't need to be long. And the problem is, when you see with endurance, people just float the term strength training. And I'm like, what's that? That can range anywhere from powerlifting, Olympic lifting, CrossFit, you name it. So what is the correct stuff? Depends on people's injury history, depends on their background. But at the end of the day, we're not trying to make people, because people think, I'm going to get bigger. Most endurance athletes are not. If they have a propensity for that, they probably already look like that. They came from a rowing or a football background and got into endurance sports later in life. So you got to be careful from there. The easiest way to explain it is triathlon or endurance sports in general. They're power endurance sports. And to have power, we need strength. And again, I saw this somewhere long ago, and I've always remembered the best way to explaining, for that people go, no, it's an aerobic sport. I'm like, no, the muscles and the levers drive us forward. And the way to explain that is like, if you got two identical twins and they're both going to run a marathon, okay, the definition of power is force times distance divided by time. So we got our two twins and they weigh the same. They're, the force, their stress on landing on the ground is going to be equal for the whole marathon. The distance is 26.2. So one runs, 5 minutes faster than the other. And then when they ran 5 minutes faster, if you plug that into the equation, is divided by time. So they're technically more powerful. So we need to have strength to create power, and people equate strength with size, and that's not necessarily true. And some of the stuff I'm working on now is like, in our lower body, if we're doing like a barbell type of split squat, like in, running, I don't have any original ideas. The only original idea maybe I have is cycling angles and running angles. A running angle is basically would be like, say, a split squat, go into like 45 degrees or so, because you can use a lot more load. But when we're running with, 3 to 5 times our body weight per foot strike, we need tremendous amount of strength and stiffness in the lower leg and the ankle. Whereas to be able to push the pedals, in a time trial position, we've got to be really strong coming over the top of the pedal stroke, but you can't use massive amount of weight. So you're trying to, doing a rear foot where your back foot is up on a bench, and you're getting into those deeper angles and really hitting the glutes. And so those are two things that I've been working a lot on with really good results, because at the end of the day, you just can't take a broad brush approach for any athlete, except maybe in the very beginning if they're starting from zero. But if you do too much, then it's going to take away. They're going to be sore. It's going to take away from their swimming, biking, and running. So you've got to run a fine line. You got to do enough that's going to yield a result, and it's got to be time efficient, that it's not going to take away from their other stuff. It can kind of live. But I put that on, I've always had that as an equal balance with swimming, biking, and running.
So how much of it, for me, I didn't personally spend a lot of time in the gym so much. Most of my strength work was done, doing the specific exercise. So, if it was swimming, I'd put a towel around my ankle and put a pull buoy between my legs, and I preferred that over paddles or anything else. And then, biking, the big gear, like we talked about, was just my staple, whether it be 12 by 5 minutes or 20 by 3 minute, that type of work. And then running, a lot of running straight up hills, or even I found stairs later in my career, like stairs were just phenomenal. How much of that do you incorporate versus how much do you think an athlete needs to be in the gym or whatever? Yeah.
They need to have that in there too. I would look at it as more, look at it more like a kind of a strength endurance, kind of a continuum. So you've got basic strength, because when we're doing basic strength stuff, the funny thing is we think when you say strength training, people think muscles, but for an endurance athlete, a lot of the benefit is going to come from, soft tissue, tendons, ligaments that we're fortifying, making them resilient. Because most of the injuries, you're not going to get that many triathletes, pulling a hamstring unless they got really super weak glutes or something. Most of it's going to be some sort of overuse itis in nature. So there's a big part of that. So we have the basic strength, and then, you go into power, which can be, doing strength exercise, a little bit lighter, higher speeds. That can then drift into, now we go into the more, kind of specific endurance, which would be running hills, swimming with paddles, VASA ergometers, bike trainers, hills. And so we got this whole continuum, because we need the strength, because a lot of, you look at a lot of athletes, there's a strength component of it, whether that's specific on, swimming, biking, and running, or general, are both necessary.
Just so people can have some takeaways from this, are there certain favorite specific workouts that you recommend for triathletes? You did mention doing the 3-minute big gears earlier. Are there specific ones that you'd like over others? Hill running or what?
I like hills. I like hills and then flats afterwards, because then you get the glutes and everything activated. You can then run fast, whether it's 1 minute hills with either 200s or 400s afterwards, or hills and flats where you run up a hill. Actually, I did this the other day. Do a hill rep, come back down, and you have a flat at the bottom, and then you run a minute fast flat, and then come back. So it actually becomes kind of more like a fartlek type workout, because you're always moving, but you've got the hills and you've got the flat stuff in there. Bike stuff, I love using a lot of gearing, different gears, using low gearing, medium, high, because people get stuck. And maybe swimming's the worst with that. People get stuck into a certain, turnover rate. And I think in swimming is where we miss it the most, because we're like, oh, it's technique. I'm like, well, no, when you get tired, it all looks like crap.
Yeah.
So I think in swimming, because most people come from, certainly if you look at age group triathlons, many of them come from a non-swim background. So they're aerobically fit. They're just not muscularly fit. And, I always say, like, you can give me virtually anybody, and you give me half an hour, I can make it look really good for about 50. And then it's going to go downhill. So it's a matter of what happens under fatigue. Yeah. What is your habits? Does your cadence slow down running, or what happens on the bike? Do you go to a big gear and the cadence slows down? Those are the things that you start to uncover in someone's training, and then you start to, put those into their workout so that they can build those capacities.
How much of it, especially when we look at swimmers and people that start swimming later, I see all these swim coaches around the world trying to get them to have these super long strokes and all of it. No. And I'm like, but they're so tight and their scaps aren't moving and they're rotating, it's like,
right.
How much of what you're doing is more about, okay, let's open you up as much as we can before we start adding any weight.
Less of it in the pool. I've kind of evolved to the point where I don't do a lot of the traditional drills, but we're doing stuff like thoracic mobility work, because if you can't anchor the hips and rotate at the thoracic spine, your elbow's never going to come up.
It doesn't matter what you do. I agree. It's like,
right. And then if you said, well, you're swimming with the shoulders flat in the water and you're telling the person to lift your elbow up, the only thing they're going to get is a shoulder impingement injury and get out of the pool.
Yeah.
So that's where, and I guess that's where it all crosses over. So we're looking at it as a whole and going, what are the things we need to do to build into that? So that where you can do a lot of different type of exercises, and some people maybe they need more upper body versus lower body, or they've got muscle imbalances, and a lot of it starts with just basically what's their injury history. Because if you look at that, that's the first place to start, because that's what they're most likely going to happen down the road as they start to train more and train more intensely.
Nice. So okay, let's look at this then. When we think of triathletes, there are a lot of triathletes listening. I'd love to sort of have a little bit of a layout, if we could, of suggested exercises, more looking at the rehab piece, because it feels like every triathlete, if they're not injured, they're close to being injured, right? And you mentioned, swimming, internal rotators and that rounded shoulders. Okay, so let's start with swimming. What are some of your favorite exercises to sort of get those shoulders back and work on the external?
Any type of horizontal row. When you were saying at the beginning, like doing push-ups and pull-ups, my first thought is, oh God, watch out for his shoulders, because both of those are internal rotators.
Yeah.
So as soon as some sort of a horizontal row, whether that's with a TRX or a cable, but we're pulling where you're, kind of your elbows are at shoulder level and you're squeezing those shoulder blades. And we talk about, the scapula, the shoulder blades don't work. And so now, if we kind of, even with a 2-arm, if we're going to pull that and squeeze those shoulder blades, when you're coming back, you're controlling it, but you're going into a stretch. So you're actually kind of creating a lot of movement there. So not only is it a strength exercise, you're creating that scapular mobility, it's creating scapular, range of motion. Thoracic mobility drills for triathletes are huge, because swimming, cycling in an aero position, sitting at a desk, driving, all are rotating. So I think the best thing for that is just regular, and at least daily, if not a couple times a day, is just like foam rolling on the thoracic spine. Get like the snap, crackle, and pop, because that's always in a flex position. And when that's in a flex position, it's going to put stress on your shoulder and your back.
Well, when you think of those, just leaning in on this a little bit more, the seated row type, or the horizontal seated row, is it single arm any better than doing both arms, or is it not matter?
Actually, I like single stuff, because you get the added bonus of core stuff. So when people say like, oh, do core or abs, I go nuts. It's funny when you run a weight room, you have a certain culture, certain word, everyone laughs like, oh, don't say that word, because when you're doing a one arm, whether it's a one arm press or a one arm row, you're getting a lot of oblique work, because the core stuff we need to do as endurance athletes is not creating movement, with the exception maybe a flip turn. But with cycling and running, and even when we're swimming, it's eliminating unwanted movement. So you get that, twisting. You can see it, and a lot of this stuff comes from, anyone listening here in Clermont is going to get paranoid when they see me out on the trail, because it really a lot of this comes from just observing literally hundreds of people every week when I'm out training. And I think when you're a coach, you can't get away from it. You look at someone hip dropping, and in my head, I'm already calculating. It's like Rain Man. I'm making the calculation. You need to do this. You do this. And I'm like, stop this. But I guess that's just how I think.
Oh no, it was funny. Our house in Boulder that we sold last year, but it looked out over one of the trails that everybody would run past, and Laura and I would just sit there and not judge, but you just couldn't help yourself and go, oh, that's off, and you just analyze. You analyze it for the sake of interest, not judgment. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? It's like I'm not.
Yeah, it's the same thing on the bike, and I talk about this in the high performance aging. When you look at bike, you got people, with a $10,000 bike and a 25-cent setup. They got them in this aggressive aero position that no one can ride in.
No.
My philosophy with my athletes is like, if you can't ride for 90 minutes comfortably in your aero position, something's wrong.
Stop it.
We got to fix it. At the very least, you're not going to enjoy riding your bike.
No, it's going to be awful. And so let's talk about that with cycling, because this is a big one. In terms of these days, everybody's pushing more and more for aerodynamics. And there's ways to become aerodynamic without being so aggressive. For me, I just lifted my hands right up and dropped my head in, right? And But there's still, when you're talking Ironman, you're talking, these are long, long times to be in one position. How do you sort of help an athlete with their strength and mobility to get in the most aerodynamic positions? What are some of the key areas that you work on?
A lot of it's going to be glute stuff. I mean, talk about the scapula stuff is huge because when you're in a long period of time, in that aero position, you kind of your shoulder blades are wanting to be kind of popped off of your back. Upper back. And so the rhomboids become real important to make sure they're flexible, and then you can kind of create, scapula movement to kind of just get blood flow in there. Otherwise, you're going to get that sharp pain right between the shoulder blades. Making sure they're in a comfortable position, at their low back. They might ride well, but if they can't get off the bike and they're hunched over and can't run because their hip flexors cramped up,
the psoas
they can't breathe. I see a lot of people in a position where their diaphragm can't extend, so they're short breathing. They get off the bike, they stand up and they cramp up, and then the other one is in the glutes. There's weak glutes. If the glutes are weak, they'll tend to shift themselves forward and just pedal with the quads.
Hello, that was me.
Yeah. Well, I think we all started that. I mean, you do the same thing. I mean, back in the day when aero bars first came out, we had road bikes. We shoved we didn't know what the hell we were doing. We just were trying to figure it out. Yeah. But it's really like doing a leg press. I mean, it kind of set home. There was a really good. It came out. The guy Niels van der Poel, who the 10K speed skater. He wrote kind of after the Olympics, he kind of wrote his manifesto, and he's super into cycling, and basically says like speed skating is nothing more than he had the number of how many strides, like so many single leg presses.
Yeah, right.
And if you think of that and bring it into a time trial bike, it's really the same thing. It's just one hard, RPM after another, because you're riding in a time trial versus reacting, in terms of pack racing. And to that extent, I've had a lot of really good results and decreases of injury with using a mid cleat foot position.
Interesting. We were a bit more like that as well. We get over the cleat a little bit more. Yeah. And especially, for Laura, one of her injuries that almost took her out of the 2008 games was her cleat had been shoved forward by one of the one bike fit she had, and that just put way too much strain on just her plantar and all that fascial system of the lower leg, and almost took her out. And even the great bike mechanic that we ended up having work with us later on was like, well, no, you're all set up to be a sprinter on the bike, but you're not sprinting, you're not trying to win the final couple 100 meters of a Tour de France stage. It's like you're on there to ride the bike, and so we shifted everything back. So that's good insight.
Yeah, even now they make these really cool. When I started playing around with this a few years ago, I had to drill my own shoes like to move the cleats back. But now they make adapters, which makes it easier, so you can play with it. And I found it for masters athletes. I found it really useful to take stress off of their calves. Mm-hmm. Putting that strain on the lower leg as much.
A quick mini break to remind you to go check out AnyQuestion. You can use anyquestion.com/Coach Tim, or find it on iOS or Android. AnyQuestion. All right, mate. So when we're talking about those single leg squats, is there any kind of way that you like them to be done?
Yeah, low reps. I mean, I like somewhere between 4 and 8. Once you get above 8, you start to get into more hypertrophy, and the load is too low. You start to get below 4, the weight starts to get too high, and you start to risk injury. And I'm a big I love single leg stuff. I still do some bilateral stuff like a trap bar deadlifts. I'm a huge fan of, because that puts us into really close to a cycling specific angle. But then I also like the single leg stuff, split squatting to run angles or lighter and deeper into cycling angles. And, I've been experimenting with doing those type of workouts immediately before I go out and do a hard ride on the road or on the trainer. And it's fantastic. I don't know if I'm going any faster, but I feel good.
No, but how much of that is, in terms of angles of movement when you're doing those exercises, is it very specific to the bike, or do you tend to take those angles and go a little deeper?
Yeah, I try to be as specific to the bike as we can without injuring someone. What I'll notice is a lot of athletes, we have to start with body weight, and they're super sore, which is telling me, their glutes are weak. Because if you think of it, most people, in the pedal stroke, most people are going to have their optimal power, let's say between 2 o'clock and 4 o'clock. Mm-hmm. If we can strengthen the glutes and maybe get them applying force at 1 o'clock or even 1:30, that's a significant amount of, extra force we're putting in with every pedal stroke.
I like that. It was, Jan Frodeno, arguably one of the greatest of all time to do the sport of triathlon. We both used to laugh because both of our glutes were pathetic. And I know that he did start working a lot more on his glutes, especially as he got a bit older. And that has helped, although he was injured earlier this year. There's a reason why we get a lot of lower leg injuries if you haven't got the stabilizers right up above as well.
I have with the bikes, with all that, with the glute stuff, I have my way to motivate just about any athlete, because we can do this for performance reasons. Or the other thing is that, you're going to be running around in public in a skin tight suit. So pick whichever motivates you more. Either way, you're going to get you to do it.
Vanity will always win.
Yes, that's the last straw. No, if nothing else works, that will.
I like that. All right, running. For me, the running injuries, for the most part, for triathletes, a lot of them just come from, in my mindset, from these tight psoas and hip flexors.
Yes.
You're getting off the bike and it's got you bound up and you're not elongated, and you can't get your heel down. You can't open up the lower leg because your hips are so tight. So when you're dealing with running injuries, Achilles, plantar fasciitis, ATB, anything around that knee, is most of your sort of thinking around the hips, or how do you rehab?
Both hips, the hips and the ankle are really, I do a lot. I love using, part of we always use in our warm-up stuff and our pre-ab work is mini band stuff. So we're doing, this guy, Cal Dietz out of University of Minnesota does some really good stuff with what we call glute reset work. And it's basically getting the glutes to fire. So when we do the exercises, they're actually working. Because sometimes you can do a lower body exercise, it looks like the glutes are working, but maybe they're not. So we get the extra work in there with the glutes, but the ankle isometrics, which is where that ankle rocker exercise you were talking about earlier with the stick really starts to come from. It was a game changer. And what I've done a lot with strength and conditioning is I'll learn from really smart people in strength and conditioning, and they have no clue about endurance sports. And I just take the same stuff and bring it over and adapt it. That's really what I do. And going this makes a lot of sense. And so his spring ankle theory is just doing ankle isometrics in different positions and building tension. Because when you think of if we look at your masters type athlete, really any triathlete for that matter, their foot is sticking to the ground. They don't have that pop off the ground, and that's there's a stiffness, but you still need to maintain mobility as well. But you want to have that stiffness in the lower leg, because the fascinating thing is even in the foot. So the foot and ankle I put together. So I'm a huge fan of doing strength training and either socks or bare feet to build those muscles up, because that's your connection with the ground. And one of the fascinating things, which was a game changer for me, when they said if your foot and ankle don't work correctly, if you've ever had an ankle injury at any point in your career, the mechanics of your ankle might be off. And if that's the case, then the neural drive from the brain to the hip is going to be down regulated. And I'm wait a second. So all the work we're doing on the hips and stuff, if we don't take care of the ankle, might be for naught. And then if you look at the knee is just hinge joints are dumb, like the elbow. They just flex and extend. If you have a knee issue, if someone has a knee problem, you should want to look at, you look at the joint below and the joint above, where the issue might be. So we kind of look at that as a whole, and it's just a constant, long-term progression. How do we do it better? I try to make sure when I'm doing this, I'm probably 4 or 5 months ahead of my athletes in terms of experimenting. And sometimes it goes badly and I get injured. So you realize, okay, but that's okay. I'd rather be me than them, because you're you start to push the limits. And I did that a couple of weeks ago. I strained something in my lower leg. All right, mental, okay, get a paper out, make a note. That was too much. It might have been the weight was too much, or my progression was too fast, or stuff like that. So you start to learn that stuff. And that's just really, I find that's the most fun part of it. Yeah,
I'm a bit of a self-experimenter these days, but I still do the same dumb shit that I've done when, 30 years ago. I was up at our corporate retreat, actually at Ed Baker's house, and he had a pool there. And so I put his fins on for swimming. Yeah. And you feel fantastic with fins, I'm barreling along. And so I do a few of them and come home, and now my foot, post-tib, where it inserts on the side of your foot there, is just in agony. And I couldn't run or anything for 2 weeks. But that was the injury I always got whenever I did fin work.
Posterior tib stuff is by far what I see the most of. And one of the things that I've used the last couple of years, I think is really, really effective, is one of those, you see them in rehab, it's just a wooden, it's adjustable, like a little slant board.
I know the ones you're talking about.
And the reason for that is to do fascial work. So the other big thing that I've been looking at, this is going to be the next big in strength and conditioning, is fascial stuff.
Yes.
Because how it's linked. So what we're seeing is that when we're doing one of those when you're doing those single leg isometrics for the ankle, when I'm doing that, I'm feeling it firing right through my glute. So you realize how everything is connected. And we tend to look at, body parts, push, pull, chest press, lat pull down, squatting. But everything is connected.
Yeah.
That
fascial system is unbelievable, isn't it? Like Dr. Alex Keith, right? Who was the chiropractor for the USA. And we worked with Alex. He's a very good friend of mine from 2004 onwards for our career. And, he taught us how to self-scrape, or what they call, Graston is the term that they often use. But Laura and I brought Graston into our lives permanently.
I know I'm a fan. I've played around and studied it. I've done a little bit because if you can do it a little bit, like anytime something starts to feel not quite right, it can be hugely effective. It's funny you say that. Like I had this great epiphany. I might try it today. I was like, hey, if I'm going in the hot tub every night for 10 or 15 minutes, why can't I scrape my lower leg in there? So stay tuned. Like I don't know if the scraping thing is going to heat up and burn me, but I'm like, that's a great idea. So I'll let you know how that works out.
I think when there's a bit of warmth there, that does help. But it's,
theoretically,
we've let. I mean, this is how I probably shouldn't even be sharing this on this show. But we would always start with sort of tablespoons and a bit of moisturizer or whatever. We didn't buy all the stuff. For me, that was all nonsense. I just whatever tool you've got that's got a nice sort of curve to it that's not too sharp, and just gently go over an area, and either an acute area or do the opposite side. I always found the opposites. If I've got a sore pec, release the back or open up the pec as well. But either way, it's kind of like it's usually the opposite. But then, these days, I often have to slip off my wedding ring and I'll scrape through my post-tib or anterior tib or something as I'm running and be like, oh, instant relief. The fascia was just a little bit locked. It was a little dehydrated. It wasn't moving smoothly.
No, exactly. Yeah. It's like, and that's the stuff that for me, it's the stuff that keeps me going because there's always something cool. Like it blows apart everything you thought to be true. Yeah. And you're like, whoa, this is cool. Thankfully, I find one or two of these things every year. And then that becomes maybe the focus of things I'm really going to, take a deep dive into, not just very cursory, but like really understand it, read everything there is, who the people to talk to, really understand it. That's a fun part.
I'm glad you're going to do that. I think, for us, we always looked at fascia as like being this elastic band that goes from your little toe to the top of your head. And the ability for fascia to work as a recoil, and for me, if I was to say, what was one of my greatest physical strengths in the sport of triathlon was the way my fascia worked as it was a little bit tight, but with that I got this great explosiveness from it and this power that you talk about. I think my fascia generated more power than my muscles, specific strength.
No, I agree. It's like people say, that's why I need to stretch. Everything has to be stretch. It's like not necessarily.
No. It's actually all right to have it a little bit loaded.
Yeah, we do that way. I do that with basketball players. Everyone thinks, they're tight. I'm like, that's why they have a 42 to 43 vertical.
Exactly.
No, it's true. Like, so we're going to make them more flexible. And what's that going to do for them? That is their game. And, it's the same thing. Like, hey, let's put, you got a kid that's coming in, he's a senior and he's a high draft, he's going to probably go to college and then he's going to be a lottery pick in the NBA. Hey, let's put 20 pounds of muscle on him. Like, you idiots. No. Yeah. So, and that's a part of not screwing people up. It sounds good in theory, but the idea is like, you just got to think it through because all that force and stuff that's coming through there eventually is going to get, so as I say, it's all fun and games when someone gets poked in the eye. It all sounds good because our athletes, like our computers, don't have an undo key.
No.
You can't mess it up and go, oh crap, let me hit that and go back. It's done.
Mm-mm. So you better know what you're doing. And I think you put it right earlier where, it's mobility over flexibility to some degree. It's like understanding, yes, you want to work with flexibility over time and work for leverage, but understanding how all these systems work together.
The flexibility part of it, for endurance athletes, for triathletes or whatever, you only need as much range of motion as you need. You don't need the range of motion of a gymnast. So if your range of motion for running, you really don't need, that much. You don't need as much as a sprinter, but you need to have enough to do the things that you want to do. Anything excess might be detrimental. Same thing with swimming. You don't have to be hypermobile. We got mobility and stability are two opposing forces. So the more mobile a joint, the less stable the joint, and vice versa. So like a lot of things, you got to, run that fine balance between the two.
Well done, mate. This has been fantastic. I want to move into, we've done a fair bit on strength, and I truly appreciate that because I know personally I'm taking notes and it's all fantastic to go over all of these things. I want to just do a little bit of a stint on, it's kind of a new segment I've started adding to the podcast, and it's basically just called Opinions. and it's a bit of fun. It really is just a bit of fun, but I thought we could dive into it. Okay, so the first one, who do you think would you regard as the top 3 coaches of all time in endurance sports as a whole, or you can even look at other sports as well? I don't mind wherever you go. Somebody that you kind of
I can do it. Yeah, I'll do endurance sports. Arthur Lydiard.
Oh yes, thank you.
Be one. I'd actually put, because he's a personal favorite of mine, Percy Cerruti.
Oh, Percy, the great Aussie.
I read his books. I like the old stuff. And Brett Sutton.
Well done. Well, I think Brett, he falls in that Percy Cerruti group. Like a lot of the work we did was all based around Percy, and
they're all connected. I mean, if you although Brett has it, I read all of his articles, and anything he writes, I will read. But when you look at Lydiard, Bowerman, and you could have put him in there too. And Cerruti, there was a commonality. I did a year where I read all the top running coaches, and you start to connect and go, and you start to see the same thing showing up in multiple places. You're going, this is something that needed to be important.
Yeah, well done. And Arthur Lydiard, for me, When Laura and I decided to coach ourselves in 2004, boy, I did a lot of research on that guy and the way he coached. So yeah, you picked some really great names there, mate. Awesome. All right, moving on to athletes. Greatest of all time athlete, any sport. Ooh. Male. Let's see if we can pick out one male, one female. I'll give you one little caveat to that. You can't be, there's no wrong answers.
Yeah.
There's no right answers. So
depends how far back I want to go. Yeah. But male, I come from a soccer background. I guess I have to say Pelé.
Nice. Oh, I love that.
He shifted how he changed the world. No one else, people stopped a war for him.
Well, look at what he did with the leather ball too, by the way. These weren't
I love watching. I watched a documentary last year, the old video clips back in the 50s of what he could do. He would still be a great player now.
Yeah.
Female athletes, I'd have to say Katie Ledecky.
Nice. All right.
And the reason for that is not just what she, and again, I could probably even go with Michael Phelps as that as well. But Katie Ledecky, only because she brings it year after year, and it doesn't matter what the meet is. Yeah. It's just she's a gamer. She'll come out and, it could be a lower level meet, and she'll set a world record and hammer it just because she can.
I love that answer. They're two great ones, mate. Okay. How about this one? What are your thoughts on the modern day super shoe that they're using in running right now? Yay or nay?
Yeah. It's kind of an unlevel playing field. If I can't complain. When they first came out with them, over at school, we have, a lot of the track athletes like Justin Gatlin and stuff train there. So I got my hands on one before everybody else, and it helped me in some races. But either we make them where they're accessible and affordable for everybody, or we don't.
Yeah.
I think gravel triathlons are a great thing. I'd love to go back where it's not about the fast gimmicks and it's just about the athlete. And running used to be like that. Swimming is like that now, but get back to, kind of the purest part of running if we can, but I don't know if we're going to stop that train.
No, I agree. They're quite incredible. I don't buy the racing shoes because I'm not racing at all, but I've gone and just got this last couple of years started using the Nike Pegasus. I think I'm just on the 37. I think they're up to about 39, but it's really allowed me to run on road and concrete more than I ever could before the shoes before. And this is just the material. It doesn't have the carbon plate or anything else in it.
Right.
And it's just amazing how many more miles I can do without damage to the body.
See? You might contemplate coming out of retirement now.
Oh, mate, I thought about it.
But I think, but to that end, I think those shoes are great because if they allow people to run injury-free.
That's what I was thinking. Yeah, I like that.
And we've had this, we've got this running. It's funny. It's like all these type of conversations. This is what it's like in my garage when Jared comes over, because this is the type of conversation we have all the time. It's kind of like, what if you really strengthen the glutes and the ankle and you use the shoes? Do you get a multiplier effect?
Yeah, well, I think you do. I'll never forget.
I do too. We got to test it out, but I honestly believe you get more out of the rebound for sure.
Well, I almost think also when you look at a triathlete with those shoes, not only are they running faster, but because the damage to the body from training isn't as much, they're able to spend more energy on the bike in bike training, and we're seeing an elevation in the bike performances as well. I mean, obviously there's aerodynamics and improvements in the way they're training, but
and they can run better off the bike. I just remember the first time I used those shoes in a race. My lungs would kill me. I almost was running fast. I got to slow this down. Like my body wanted to run way faster than I was capable of. And I'm like, this is not going to end well. was excited about it, but I'm like, wow, this really works.
That's great. That's the first time I've heard that. I like that. All right, let's do this one. Triathlon predictions for 2022. Let's pick two events. Let's do Kona Ironman, men and women champions, and the World Triathlon Series champions, man and woman. Ooh. If you're up to date. If you're not up to date on these, you can not worry. I'm
going to go easy. That I'm not. I haven't spent as much time in that world as of yet. But certainly on the Ironman, you can't bet against Christian Blumenthal. And I think Lucy Charles-Barkley will come back and win. And the reason I will say that is because she's had time off from the sport. And typically when people, you can't rule out Jan either if he gets healthy, because sometimes these people race so much that when they get a huge chunk of time off, they actually sometimes can come back better and faster.
No, I like that. I mean, both Jan and Lucy have had a testing few months. I actually wrote Jan just this morning. We were chatting and I wrote him and I said, you've had a testing year, mate. He wrote back and said, Greg, the year's going to be awesome. I've had a testing few months. And isn't that a champion's mindset? I was like,
I love that. You love that, because in his mind, everyone else has like written him off. In his mind, it's just the opposite. That's why I love the part where you don't see a lot, like when people are injured, and I think Jan would fall in the category. It's back in the days, and you remember before the internet when athletes, the season would end and people would go home and just train, and you wouldn't see on Twitter and Instagram what people were doing. Everything was dark, and then everyone showed up at the race, and you're like, well, hey, I'm 2% faster, but is everybody else 5% faster?
Exactly.
I miss that, because you just go into hibernation, you do your stuff, and you come out and just see, do I make the cut this year? Where's everybody at? I think we almost share, share too much information. And I think we did this as a joke back in, I think it was like 2010, as I had our dog was a retired greyhound, and just for joking, we attached a Garmin to it, the collar, and made him sprint at 30 miles an hour, and then we posted it saying, Jared was doing some really good speed work. We posted the file, and people are looking like, what's going on there? It's like, how silly. So maybe we created disinformation before it was a thing.
It's all nonsense, honestly. Yeah. It's all nonsense. All right. How about we conclude with some rapid fire questions, and these are more fun than anything else. And I need another book. So one of them is going to be, the first one is one book you would recommend. Oh, this new one called Upstream by Dan Heath. What's that about? That is about upstream thinking. Is not, most people are downstream thinking. It's kind of a dry book, but the concepts are really good. Basically, it's like being out ahead of basically solving problems before they happen. Oh, perfect. Cool. As opposed to putting out fires. So when you put out fires, for example, as a strength coach, you see this all the time. I can't prove that the things that we did prevented X amount of ACL injuries. But we know when nothing happens that something good's happening. So you're putting the right things in place, as opposed to just like waiting till something happens and then you're looking like a hero and putting out the fire. Brilliant. Perfect. I appreciate that. I'm a big time Audible reader these days, because I listen at 3 times the speed. I fly through books at the moment, just let them wash over me. So I'll do that. Yeah, but does it sound like chipmunks? No, it sounds awesome. And especially when I'm running. Now I can't go back to 2 or 1 speed. Makes me feel almost a bit seasick or something. It doesn't work. But I'm writing that down. That's a good tip. Yeah, it's really cool. People freak out and go, you listen to 3 times. I'm like, look, I was at 1 times, then I went to 2 times, and I was at 2 times for a while. I was going to ask, did you go to 2 first? Yeah, and then you get to 2.5, and then you're like, we'll go to 3 and 3. But what was funny, I tried 3.5, which is as fast as Audible can go, and I was like, oh no, I can't do that. And then I went back to 3, and it was like, oh, it's very easy, and I get it. I found the sweet spot. Yeah. All right. 2 most used apps on your phone right now. 2 most used apps. iThlete, heart rate variability, and Garmin Connect. Look at you, always the coach. Love it. Yeah. All right. What time of day? Sheltered life. I do social media when I have to, but I'm pretty resistant to it. No, I get it. It can be a useful tool. Yes, exactly. All right. What time of day are you most productive? Morning. Yeah. First job you ever had? First job I ever had. How far do you want to go back? Full-time job? Any job. If we go back, I'll go to that. Let's go all the way back. Yeah, was a fitness director at a large multi-purpose fitness facility, which had tennis and swimming and strength. It was a great learning environment. Oh, great. You've always been in this world then. Yeah. I don't know anything. I can't do anything else. All right. Which decade of music is best? 80s. Good man. Actually, it's funny. I was watching TV and I was flipping through the channels and I saw Foreigner playing live, and I had to stop and listen to it for a few minutes. So yeah.
That made my morning.
Yeah, Laura's a huge fan of Florida as well. It's very American. I love it though. It is very cool. Greatest movie of all time?
Rocky 2.
Which one's that?
Oh, that's the one where he won. The first one he lost.
So does he later get Apollo Creed?
Yeah. I was like, 12 years old. It's probably what got me into like training and stuff. Like he'd never seen that. I was thinking about this recently, like, the Rocky movies, and then Arnold Schwarzenegger and like Conan the Barbarian. You never, at that point in the early 80s, you'd never seen people training in that stuff. It was just the most fascinating thing at that point. And like a 10 or 12-year-old.
Yeah, I love it. That's great. I like those. All right, mate. What's next for you? What do you got coming up?
I'm going to do some races. I want to do challenge. I'll do the sprint up at Challenge Daytona. I try to, great thing with Florida, I like to race, maybe once a month, about 10 times a year.
I like that.
I like that because that way I can reload. I can no longer race several times a month if I want to try to race well. It gives me time to recover. Another week, and I start to head back to school. And I love having my 2-month summer off as a teacher schedule. It's like a sabbatical. It's when I get to work on other stuff, get refreshed, and then get back at it.
Very cool. Well, mate, I really appreciate you just coming on in this conversation and everything you've done on AnyQuestion. I also truly appreciate, and for people that want to go check it out, honestly, you're there. You've already answered. I think you've answered about 100 questions.
I don't know. I tried to do a couple of days. I've been working on doing some of the newer stuff on there of cropping and
there's some new features.
It's fun. You try to learn some of the new stuff and try to have interesting articles. I think there's always the kind of the patented first answer, but I was like, okay, what's the second answer?
Yeah.
All looking. I've actually had some fun looking at what some when other people have answered it, and then piggybacking on that. I've been doing a little bit of that, and that I enjoy because now you're starting to create a conversation.
I think that part, the answer by others feature, so, you can have 10 of the world's greatest strength coaches all discussing, what's the best technique for a seated row, whatever the question is. And you can look through and look at all the answer by others and go, oh, okay. And you get some different ideas and different ways of looking at it. That is one of my favorite features of the whole platform. But mate,
it's a great, I learn a lot by being on there. The other thing I'm worried about now is I wonder if I should send you the picture. I wonder if I got to erase this from my marker board, but I just like it seen up there. I might keep it.
What's that picture?
It says Bennett Podcast. Has been a goal of mine for the last year. I've always wanted to be on this show.
Oh, mate, I'm so happy that we're able to make this happen, and we can tick that box. It's amazing, though. In doing that, I'm a big believer of putting things out in the universe and how gravity or whatever it is has a way of attracting it to you. Do you know what I mean? I think
it has been in the back of my mind. I remember like a couple months ago, I asked Jared and Alicia, I said, hey, when you think of it, send me Greg's email. I want to touch base and I got some ideas and it might be good for a show. And totally, we kind of forgot about it. And then when you mentioned it in that meeting, I'm like, all right, he mentioned it. Now's the time.
I'm so glad you did too, Tim.
So I appreciate you having me on. It's just been, it's been fun and entertaining. I just hope people listen; they might get something out of it.
Oh, absolutely! And look, the gratitude's all mine, mate. I've truly appreciated this time just to be able to sit and be entertained and learn so much from you. So I really appreciate it. And for everybody listening, you can go follow up questions and ask Tim questions at AnyQuestion.com. And you can find Tim on there. He's already got a bunch there, but you can ask him more questions there. You can also find all the show notes, timestamps, links, and everything else at bennettendurance.com/media.
Thanks a lot for listening. If you enjoyed the show, your support would truly be appreciated. You can visit the Patreon page, or you can subscribe with your podcast app of choice. Don't miss the next episode, so subscribe and be notified. For show notes, if you want to know more, please visit bennettendurance.com. I'm Phil Liggett, and on behalf of Greg Bennett, here's to the next time, and I hope you will join Greg again very soon.